Hey guys, I'm Bud Elliott of 24/7 Sports, and it's midsummer now. We're talking national title contenders, and one thing I look forward to doing each summer is figuring out which teams actually have enough talent to win the national title. It's something I've been doing for over a decade now in the college football space, and I do that with something that I call the blue chip ratio. And the blue chip ratio is just a ratio of how much talent you actually have on your team through recruiting. So I've gone back through history and I've looked how much talent do you actually need to win the title? And my research, as I've published every year for about a decade now, shows that you need to have signed more 4 and 5 star recruits than 2 and 3 stars over the previous 4 classes. Now, you might think, okay, yeah, that's pretty obvious. You have to recruit well. But so often now we hear, hey, only Georgia can win the title, or only Bama, or only Ohio State. But historically, that's not actually true. The list of teams that can actually win the national title is typically bigger than you think. Now, yes, they might need a little bit of luck. They may need to have a great quarterback, as we saw with Auburn and Cam Newton, or Clemson the first time around with Deshaun Watson. But ultimately, if you recruit at this baseline minimum level, more 4 and 5 stars than 2 and 3 stars, you can get it done. So let's go ahead and drop the list for this year. As you see, Alabama with, again, the highest of all time score, 89%. Will Anderson, Bryce Young, just totally dominating on both sides of the ball. Alabama, they do their own scouting, but ultimately they do end up with a ton of 4 and 5 star players on their team. Nick Saban, one of the best recruiters of all time. That's why he has all of those national championship rings on his fingers. Ohio State, another obvious selection. Ryan Day has taken over right where Urban Meyer left off. No mystery there. Georgia at 77%. Kirby Smart has just made an absolute recruiting machine. Oklahoma is an interesting one. Brent Venables, taking over for Lincoln Riley, closed pretty well on the trail down the stretch. And let's face it, Lincoln Riley was recruiting pretty well for the Sooners. That's why they were so salty to lose him in Norman. Texas A&M, a major riser on this year's list at 70%. That'll do it when you sign the best recruiting class of all time for the 24/7 Sports Composite. Texas and Steve Sarkisian always up there on recruiting lists. Brian Kelly at LSU taking over at 66%. That's not too shabby, actually. That's a team that you figure, given all the transfers they brought in, and we'll get to that in a little bit, may be able to compete in the SEC West. Clemson at 63%. The Tigers just continue to recruit very well. And then we flip the page. Notre Dame, 62%. Florida at 60%. Again, another new coach taking over a roster that, look, Dan Mullen did not recruit as well as Kirby Smart did at Georgia, or as Nick Saban did at Alabama. And that ultimately is one of the reasons he got fired, because that is the expectation there in Gainesville. But Billy Napier, coming over from Louisiana Lafayette, is not starting from scratch. He actually has a fairly talented roster there. Same goes for Dan Lanning at Oregon. Mario Cristobal leaves Oregon for Miami, another team on our list, 60% team there for the Ducks. Michigan and Jim Harbaugh, even with his flirtation with the NFL, would he go to the Vikings? Would he not? They still closed out the class just fine, and 59% over the last 4 years. Pretty good reason they made the playoff last year. Penn State, 55%. Miami, 55%. And Auburn, barely hanging on, 54%. I'm not telling you that any of these teams will win the national title. What I'm saying is this is the list of teams from which the national title winner will come. And we are seeing some interesting trends this year as well. As I mentioned, Alabama has the highest score ever. I mean, at this point in Tuscaloosa, they're kind of just picking and choosing. But if you look at this, we also have some interesting trends as well. 5 teams are actually over 70% for the first time ever. And there's been a lot of discussion. Do we see more teams getting in the mix with NIL? Or on the other side of that discussion, are there super teams being formed? And I would say possibly to the latter question. We may see super teams being formed, but we are also seeing a rotation of which teams those might actually be. But there's no doubt that the very top teams are more talented than they've been in recent years. Let's break it down by conference if we can. The SEC starts the list here with 6. That makes sense. If you don't have talent, the SEC is not the conference to be in. And even some of those programs that recruit well and would probably be in the upper half of talent, like take an Arkansas or a South Carolina, they're not going to be on this national title list, but they would be fairly competitive in, let's say, the Big 12 or especially the Pac 12. The Big 10 comes in at second on our list. All three, of course, are in the East Division with Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. A pretty good, argument there for maybe switching up divisions, maybe going division lists if you want a little more equity and balance in the Big Ten. The ACC with 2, the Big 12, of course, with 2, and the SEC is looking at that Big 12 number 2 and saying, so you're telling us in 2025 when Texas and Oklahoma join, we're going to have 8 and the Big 12 is going to have 0? Possibly so. Pac-12 with 1, USC notably dropping off this year, Oregon staying, and Independence is represented by Notre Dame. Now you might say, hey, wait, what? You said USC dropped off. They got Caleb Williams. They got Jordan Addison in the transfer portal. What? Are you not incorporating transfer ratings into the blue chip ratio? And this is something that I'm really having to consider as the guy who curates the blue chip ratio. So ultimately, I do want to incorporate transfer ratings in the blue chip ratio. I believe in our transfer ratings at 24/7 Sports. I know the people we've hired and the hours they put into this. I've seen the process. I've culled their spreadsheets. And right now, I'm just interested in the results. So this year, I will actually be running 2 numbers, the traditional blue chip ratio, which is just, high school and junior college kids. But I'm also going to present to you a number that includes the transfer ratings in it to see just how much it would change and if any other teams are represented differently. Because transfers, for the most part, are not winning national titles. Your teams that win the national titles, again, for the most part, historically, but this is changing, are made up of high school recruiting. But look at USC. They went and signed almost 20 transfers, and a bunch of them are blue chips. It does make me a little bit uneasy not to have a team quarterbacked by Caleb Williams on my list. So let's go ahead and drop the list that includes the transfer ratings, and we'll see what changes actually happen. What you're going to notice here is a trend. For the most part, no teams are added. So even though USC had a really nice transfer class, the level of their high school recruiting over the last 4 years was significantly poor enough that I did not include them in this year's list. They just missed it. Alabama actually goes up, so if you include transfers, congrats to Nick Saban on having the first 90% blue chip team. That's absurd. Everybody else goes down very slightly or stays the same. So will transfer ratings change my numbers? I don't think they will change them all that much. Certainly a team like LSU has done a great job, right? And so as Notre Dame, to the limited extent they can take transfers. Florida has taken quite a few transfers coming in. Obviously, Miami has taken a number of transfers. I do think it's important to note here that process-wise, 4 and 5 stars only make up about 8% of all scholarship recruit signees on a given year basis. This year, we have about 100 4 and 5 star transfers, and there are over 1,500 players that we're expecting to receive scholarships at the next level. So you take a look at this, that's pretty much on par with what we had recruiting ranking-wise earlier. So while I'm not ready to fully incorporate these in and call the transfer model the new blue chip ratio model, I'm not blind to the idea that recruiting is really just high school, JUCO, and transfers now, and thus it needs to be incorporated over time. I'll monitor these results. You look at all these transfers that we're playing on the screen right now, look at a team like South Carolina. They're not going to make a huge jump into our rankings, but some of these players certainly will have an impact, as the screen just showed with Spencer Rattler and tight end Austin Stogner. I do like that the transfer ratings are consistent with the high school ratings, and I also like that they're not changing the numbers that much. That gives me confidence that my numbers really won't change all that much when we finally incorporate these going forward. So I'll continue to monitor this. All right, so if your team is not on this list, I'm sorry, you will not be winning a national championship this year in all likelihood. But I do have some hope for the future. There are 3 teams that I've been monitoring that I think will probably be on this list come 2023. The first team up is Tennessee. Josh Heupel and company have done a nice job recruiting this year. They had a high-scoring offense last year. We know the Vols NIL program is just off the charts, doing a great job of getting players there to Knoxville. So be on the lookout for Tennessee. The second one is USC. Lincoln Riley's a stud recruiter. We looked at Oklahoma's blue chip ratio, which was mostly built by Lincoln Riley over the last 4 years. I fully expect the Trojans to be back on top soon. And the third one might be a surprise, but Mack Brown is just consistently chipping away at those 4 and 5 star recruits in Chapel Hill. The Tar Heels are on the rise as well. This list could swell from 15 to 18 teams come 2023.